Welcome to our token-based authentication course. In this lesson, we are going to look at the starting code, which we'll be adding authentication to, and start to understand the tasks that are required of us to make that authentication happen. The prerequisites for this course include knowledge of Vue Router, Vuex, and Axios. If you don't yet know those topics, you'll want to take our other courses that cover them and then meet me back here. But if you're all ready, then let's head into the code. If you'd like to code along, you can head into the lesson resources below this video and download the starting code and explore this with me. First, we're going to head into the main.js file, and this looks pretty familiar. Notice how we are using Vue Router and Vuex. Then in the app.vue file, notice how in the style tag we are using SCSS and importing a global style sheet from our assets directory. And here we have that file. This is just another way to use global app-level styles. You could also be pasting these into the style tag, the app.vue file. Just two different ways of handling the same thing. Heading back into the app.vue file, notice how we are importing the app nav component and using it within the template. So let's look at that component. In it, we just have a couple router links, one to the home route and one to the dashboard route. We also have an event card component, which is simply receiving an event prop and printing it out in the template. If the default syntax looks a bit weird here, that's because we want to use a function that returns a fresh, empty object, similar to how the component's data property returns a fresh data object. Now let's look at the views. In our dashboard, we are importing that event card component and then using v-for to create a new event card for each event that we got back from our API call, which you can see here in the created hook. Notice how we are importing Axios and then using it to make a call out to our API and then setting our events data equal to the response. Notice in the data, we have an empty events array. That's what we're populating from our API call. We also have an isLoading Boolean, which we are using to display this isLoading message if we don't yet have any events from our API. And then we have a home view, which is very simple, just an H1. In our router, we are importing both of those view components, and we have a route for each of them respectively. Our Vuex store file is currently empty. We will be adding to this throughout the course. And then we have this DB file, which includes an events.json, which we will be pulling from with our API, and then this user file, which we will use to register and log in our users. We also have a server file. We're using Node and Express to create a very simple authentication server. There are a lot of options for you in terms of backend authorization software, but for this course, we're going to focus on the front-end Vue side. Please know that the Node server we're using, it was the simplest possible solution we could use to get the front-end code working. You're not going to want to actually use this for a production-level application. Also, I wanted to show you the package JSON. I've added this start script, which starts our Node server and then builds our Vue app. So if we open up the terminal, we'll run npm run start. We'll see the server is started on port 3000. And then our app will be running at localhost 8080. So let's check it out in the browser. Here we have our home view being displayed. And then we can click on the dashboard. And as you can see, we have loaded these event cards, which means our API call happened successfully. But we don't want just any user off the internet to be accessing these events. We want this to be private data, which means this route needs to be a protected one. And this is where the authentication comes in. So let's dive a little deeper and start to understand what steps we need to take throughout this course. We'll need to understand the communication that's happening between the client and the server. On the server, we'll want to have three API endpoints: register, login, and dashboard. We'll need to implement the ability to register users, which points out to the register endpoint. And when a user is registered, they can log in to their account, which we will do by pointing to the login endpoint. Both of these actions will cause the server to return a JSON token, which we will use to access protected data that lives at the dashboard route, which again is a protected locked route. So when we call out to that endpoint, we'll be sending along a copy of that token. But there are a few steps we need to consider between logging in users and accessing that protected data. Upon registering and logging in, we'll get a response from the server. And this response is user data. Like I said, it will include a token along with the user's email and name. So what do we want to do with that information? Well, we'll use Vuex to do three things. First, we'll store the user data in our Vuex state. Then we will store the user data in our local storage. This allows us to persist that data in case of a browser refresh, for example. We will then add the token to the Axios header so that we can send along a copy with our API calls. And then we need to be conscious of logging out the user, which essentially is a reversal of the steps we just looked at. So first, we will clear the user data from the state, clear it from the local storage, and then remove the token from the Axios header. Great! Now we have toured the starting code and understand the steps that we'll take to implement authentication. In the next lesson, we will start registering our users. See you there. There are lots of great options for you in terms of your backend. Right. There are lots of great options for you for a backend authorization server. There are a lot of options for you for a backend There are a lot of options for you in terms of backend authorization software. There are a lot of options for you in terms of backend authorization software. In terms of backend software.
Look at my